The storm howled like an animal released from a cage, and the night was alive with the sound of shattering glass and bending steel. Rain slashed across the street as if it were tearing skin, and the air carried the sharp metallic smell of power lines sparking in the distance. Marcus Reed pressed his palm against the cold glass of his living room window and watched the fury consume everything around him. Houses that had stood for generations were splintering apart, and roofs peeled away as if they were made of paper. Inside his home, every beam groaned but held firm. The walls did not tremble, and the roof did not bow. Marcus had spent years reinforcing the frame with his own hands, adding steel braces and storm-resistant panels, while the neighborhood association dismissed his proposals for community-wide upgrades as unnecessary expenses. Now his work stood against the hurricane like a fortress. As dawn broke, the silence was worse than the chaos. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. The street looked like a battlefield strewn with debris, twisted fences, and overturned cars. Families emerged from shattered homes, their faces pale with disbelief and grief. Yet in the center of ruin, one house remained whole. Marcus stepped onto his porch with weary eyes as closed, still damp from the long night. His wife and children clung to him, grateful to be alive, but their relief quickly gave way to unease. Neighbors stared at them not with admiration, but suspicion. Gerald Whitman, the president of the Homeowners Association, approached with his polished shoes now coated in mud, and his silver hair still perfectly combed despite the disaster. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. He looked Marcus up and down, then turned his gaze to the house, standing untouched behind him. "Strange, isn't it?" he said, his voice low enough for nearby ears to catch. "Every home ruined, yet yours remains untouched. Some might say it's too perfect to be chance." Marcus clenched his jaw, refusing to take the bait. He knew Gerald well, a man who wore his authority like a crown, who smiled at meetings but never hid the disdain in his eyes whenever Marcus spoke. Gerald had fought every request Marcus had made to improve storm defenses, calling them extravagant and unnecessary. Now he lingered before the one house that had proved him wrong, and Marcus could feel the weight of resentment settling over the crowd. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. A woman clutched her ruined purse and muttered that Marcus must have done something unnatural. Another man, half in shock, claimed he had seen the winds bend away from the Reed home as if guided. None of them wanted to admit that foresight and hard work had saved the house. Blame was easier. 2 days later, when relief crews had begun clearing the streets, Marcus opened his mailbox and found a thick envelope stamped with the HOA seal. Inside was a letter dense with legal phrasing, but its meaning was impossible to mistake. The Homeowners Association accused him of manipulating the storm, of directing destruction toward others by altering the structure of his property, and demanded $10 million in damages. $10 million for surviving. His hands trembled as he read aloud at the kitchen table. His wife stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. His children sat silent, sensing the gravity of the words without needing to understand them fully. "They want to ruin us," she whispered. Marcus pressed the letter flat against the wood, as if forcing the absurdity of it into something he could fight. He remembered every late night spent working on the house, every dollar saved, every hour sacrificed. He had begged the HOA years ago to invest in stronger material for all the homes, and Gerald had laughed him off. Now the same man was accusing him of causing the devastation he had predicted. That night Marcus walked through his house, listening to the creak of the boards beneath his feet, the steady hum of power returning to the neighborhood. Each sound reminded him of his labor and of his right to stand tall in a place that wanted to tear him down. But the memory of Gerald's smirk lingered, and he knew this was only the beginning. The letter lay on the counter, its words seared into his mind. $10 million. 10 million reasons for the community to resent him. The absurdity might have been laughable, if not for the way neighbors glanced at him now with narrowed eyes and whispers just loud enough for his children to hear. He stepped onto his porch again, under a sky that had cleared to a cruel brightness. Across the street, families worked to salvage scraps from their ruined homes. Some looked at him with open hostility. Others avoided his gaze entirely. Gerald stood at the end of the block, speaking with a group of board members, his polished shoes once more gleaming. Every so often Gerald glanced in Marcus's direction with the smug certainty of a man who believed power would always shield him. Marcus knew then that survival had only opened a new battle. The storm had tested wood and steel, but what came next would test his resolve, his dignity, and the future of his family. The hurricane was over, yet the real disaster was just beginning. Marcus sat in the cramped office of a local attorney, his calloused hands gripping the arms of the chair as though it might anchor him against the rising tide of absurdity. The lawyer, a balding man with tired eyes, adjusted his glasses and sighed after scanning the HOA's lawsuit. They are demanding $10 million in damages for alleged manipulation of natural forces, he said, shaking his head. I should tell you this case has no legal standing, but they have deep pockets and a network of influence. Even baseless claims can drag on for years and cost you everything. The words landed like blows. Marcus had expected reason to prevail, yet here was a man of law admitting that truth alone might not protect him. He left the office feeling the sun press hot against his back, and for the first time the warmth felt hostile. On the walk home, he noticed Curtin's twitching neighbors' eyes peering at him with silent judgment. Their gazes cut deeper than any insult. They looked at him as though he had stolen their lives rather than saved his own. At dinner, his children pushed their food around their plates with little appetite. His son finally asked that they would have to sell the house. Marcus tried to smile, but it faltered. "This is our home," he said softly, "and I am not giving it up." His wife reached for his hand, her touch steady, but her eyes reflected the same storm he carried inside. The next morning, Marcus attended the town hall meeting where the HOA had gathered residents in the gutted community center. The room still smelled of mildew and damp wood. Gerald Whitman stood at the front immaculate, as ever his suit pressed his expression calm and commanding. "We must hold accountable those who contributed to the devastation," Gerald declared, his voice smooth and persuasive. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and all eyes shifted to Marcus. Marcus rose, his heart pounding. "My home survived because I invested my savings into strengthening it. I proposed the same measures for everyone years ago, but this board rejected me. You know this, Gerald." Gerald spread his hands in mock sympathy. "We all grieve, Marcus. But grief does not excuse reckless actions. Reinforcing a single house in such a way might have diverted destructive forces from your property directly into others. The evidence is clear." The crowd stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Fear had made them desperate for a villain, and Gerald handed them one neatly wrapped. Marcus tried again. "There is no science behind these accusations. There are engineering reports. My house survived because I prepared, not because of magic." Laughter broke out, bitter and cutting. A neighbor shouted that Marcus was lying, another that they had lost everything while he stood in comfort. The hostility swelled, pressing against Marcus like the storm winds all over again. He stepped back, his throat dry, his words drowned in noise. Later that night, his employer called. The company did not want to be associated with controversy. They placed him on indefinite leave until his legal troubles were resolved. Marcus hung up the phone in silence, then sat in the dark living room listening to the steady hum of his intact walls. Survival had become a curse. His children now walked to school under a cloud of ridicule. "Your dad caused a hurricane," classmates jeered. Marcus's daughter came home in tears, clutching a drawing where someone had scrawled his family inside a swirling storm. He knelt beside her, promising that the truth would come out, but deep down he felt the crushing weight of being one man against an entire system armed with wealth and prejudice. When his wife suggested another meeting with the lawyer, Marcus shook his head. "They want to bleed us dry," he said. "Even if I win, I lose." She reminded him of the nights he had worked double shifts to fund the reinforcement of their homely pride he felt when the last panel was nailed in place. "You saw what they ignored," she said. "You built something to stand. You cannot let them destroy it now." Her face steadied him, but the path forward looked impossible. He began documenting everything, every letter, every whispered insult, every refusal from the board when he had begged them to upgrade storm safety. He collected receipts, photographs, and inspection reports. Yet evidence alone would not sway a community blinded by anger and led by a man who thrived on control. The days dragged heavy with tension. Marcus avoided the stares of neighbors, yet he could feel their eyes burning into his back whenever he walked outside. Gerald, meanwhile, grew bolder. He strutted through the wreckage, speaking of justice and responsibility, painting himself as the guardian of order while framing Marcus as the root of disorder. One evening, as Marcus returned from clearing debris near the main road, he spotted Gerald on his porch, wine glass in hand. Gerald raised it in mock salute, his smirk illuminated by the porch light. "You should prepare, Marcus," he called casually. "The storm was just nature. What comes next is man-made, and you will not withstand it." Marcus stood frozen, every muscle tight. He wanted to shout a charge across the street, but he turned instead and went inside. His wife waited for him, her eyes filled with questions he could not answer. He only said, "They want to fight, and if I keep letting them set the rules, I have already lost." That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady tick of the clock. He thought of the storm of the house that had saved him of the hatred that now threatened to undo it all. Somewhere inside him, anger burned hotter than fear. The HOA had chosen him as their scapegoat, but he would not let them write the ending. He would find a way to fight on his terms. The lawsuit loomed like a shadow over every moment, yet Marcus felt something shift. He was no longer waiting for justice to arrive from others. He began to imagine how to seize it himself. The thought was fragile like a spark in the dark, but it refused to die. Marcus returned home late one evening, the glow of television screens flickering across living rooms, as news anchors replayed Gerald's downfall again and again. The story had grown beyond the neighborhood, now carried by national outlets, each headline a dagger of shame for the once untouchable president of the HOA. Yet victory did not settle in Marcus's chest as easily as he had imagined. He felt the weight of every insult, every sleepless night, every tear his children had shed. Justice had been served, but the scars of the battle still lingered. His wife sat at the table, waiting, a quiet strength in her posture. "They cannot touch us anymore," she said, her voice gentle. "But what do you want to do now?" Marcus looked at her, then at the walls around them, sturdy and unshaken. He thought of the families still living in ruins, the children who slept in shelters while their parents fought with insurance companies, and the board members who had followed Gerald out of ambition or fear. He had survived, but survival was not enough. The following week, Marcus walked into the community center, now cleared of debris and filled once more with residents. The air buzzed with uncertainty, the usual authority figures absent, replaced by a nervous collection of homeowners who no longer trusted those who once ruled them. Marcus stood at the front, his voice firm but calm. "We have lived through a storm and through something worse than a storm. We cannot go back to what we had. We need a new beginning built on fairness, not fear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others crossed their arms skeptical. A woman who had once accused him of witchcraft raised her hand. "And why should we follow you, Marcus? You survived while we lost everything. What makes you different from Gerald trying to stand above us?" Marcus met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "Because I am not asking for you to follow me. I am asking for us to rebuild together. I do not want power. I want community." The words settled like stones in still water. People shifted in their seats, uncertainty giving way to cautious hope. For the first time, Marcus saw not suspicion in their eyes, but recognition. They understood that he had not sought conflict, but had been forced into it, and he had fought not only for himself, but for the dignity of all. Outside the building, reporters still linger hungry for one more headline. When they asked if Marcus would seek compensation, he answered simply, "I will seek accountability, not just for myself, but for every family who was failed by those in charge." His calm resolve spread quickly through broadcast, transforming him from scapegoat to symbol. Gerald, meanwhile, faced indictment, the recordings undeniable, the paper trail damning. Stripped of authority, abandoned by allies, he shuffled through courthouse doors with shoulders hunched, his polished image gone. Marcus watched the footage once, and then turned off the screen. He did not need to see more. The man who had tried to break him had broken himself through arrogance and cruelty. Yet the true climax came not in Gerald's humiliation, but in the rebuilding of the neighborhood. Marcus coordinated with engineers and volunteers, securing grants for hurricane-proof designs. He walked through the streets every day, sleeves rolled up, his hands blistered from lifting beams and clearing rubble. Children waved at him, neighbors who once spat in his direction now offered water and thanks. His family watched him with pride, their laughter returning to the home that had once been quiet with fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the roofs, Marcus stood on his porch, watching workers reinforce a neighbor's foundation. His son tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Dad, are we safe now?" Marcus bent down, resting a hand on his shoulder. Safe is something we build every day, he said. And this time we build it together. The boy smiled, satisfied with the answer, and ran off to play in the yard. Marcus straightened his eyes, sweeping across the street, alive again with the sound of hammers and voices working in unison. He thought of the storm of the accusations of the trial of fire he had endured. Each trial had carved him sharper, stronger, more resolute. As darkness fell, he remained on the porch, the hum of rebuilding echoing in the night. A sense of finality settled over him, not as a heavy weight, but as a quiet victory. He had stood against nature and against men who sought to destroy him. He had defended not only his home, but his dignity. And in the end, he had shown that storms, whether wind or human, could not erase the strength of a man who refused to bow. He whispered to himself words that carried both triumph and warning. The storm was fierce, but arrogance was fiercer. And in the end, both passed. But I am still here. Marcus sat at the kitchen table long after his family had gone to bed, the only light a dull glow from the lamp above. Before him lay a stack of papers, letters from the HOA notes he had scribbled at midnight, recordings he had transcribed line by line. His hands were steady now, not trembling with fear, but tightened with purpose. He knew the HOA's weapon was arrogance and secrecy, and he would dismantle both piece by piece. He began with the old proposals he had once submitted to the board, requesting funds to hurricane-proof the neighborhood. The papers carried Gerald's dismissive signatures, bold and final across every page. Marcus compared them to the lawsuit now leveled against him, the contrast as sharp as a blade. In one file Gerald had written unnecessary expense in neat blue ink, a phrase that now burned with hypocrisy. Marcus scanned each document into his computer, storing them in a folder labeled Truth. The next step was harder. He set up a small camera near his front window, angled toward the street. Every evening, Gerald lingered on his porch with wine in hand, surrounded by allies who spoke freely in the belief that Marcus could not hear. The camera caught their careless laughter, their sneering remarks, their boasts of how they would break him financially and teach him his place. Marcus listened with clenched fists, but instead of anger, he felt cold clarity. Each word was another brick in the wall of evidence he was building. One night, Gerald spoke louder than usual, his voice carrying across the street. He thinks preparation makes him superior. We will strip him of everything. The others will see what happens when you refuse to follow the order we set. The arrogance was unmistakable, and the camera captured it perfectly. Marcus knew then he had enough not just to defend himself, but to expose the rot beneath Gerald's polished exterior. He reached out to a local journalist, known for covering stories of corruption. When they met in a quiet cafe, Marcus slid a flash drive across the table, his eyes fixed on the reporter's uncertain face. "Everything you need is here," Marcus said. "Letters, refusals, recordings. They try to destroy me because I built my home strong. Now let the world see how they operate." The journalist leaned back, eyebrows raised as he scrolled through the files. Each clip, each note deepened his expression from curiosity to disbelief to grim resolve. "If this is real," he said quietly, "it's bigger than a neighborhood dispute. This is systemic discrimination." And they were arrogant enough to record themselves. Within days, the story broke. Screens lit up across the city with headlines declaring, HOA accuses man of causing hurricane backlash erupts as evidence surfaces of corruption. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. Strangers from across the country defended Marcus, praising his foresight, mocking the absurdity of blaming a man for surviving. Videos of Gerald's recorded remarks circulated online, his smug voice turned into a symbol of arrogance and bigotry. The next HOA meeting drew more than just residents. Reporters crowded the narrow hall, their cameras aimed at the front, where Gerald sat stiff and pale. Marcus walked in with calm steps, carrying nothing but a small recorder in his pocket. Murmurs filled the room, some neighbors glaring at him, others suddenly unsure. When Gerald opened the meeting with his usual commanding tone, Marcus rose. He pressed a button on the recorder, and Gerald's own voice filled the room. "We will strip him of everything. The others will see what happens when you refuse to follow the order we set." The words echoed against the walls, and silence fell heavy. Gasps broke out, followed by shouts. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. Gerald's face drained of color, his composure slipping for the first time. "This is taken out of context," he stammered, but the crowd was no longer listening. One by one, residents turned on him, fear and anger mixing in their voices. "You knew about the proposals," someone shouted. "You let us suffer while he built what you refused." The room descended into chaos. Journalists snapped photos, neighbors demanded answers, and Gerald tried to retreat, but every step he took was blocked by cameras and questions. His carefully crafted image shattered under the glare of lights and the weight of his own arrogance. By the end of the night, the lawsuit was declared withdrawn. The state attorney's office announced an investigation into the HOA, citing potential fraud and discrimination. Gerald stormed out through a side door, chased by reporters, his polished shoes splattered with mud, his once perfect composure reduced to a picture of humiliation. Marcus stood at the back, watching the unraveling not with triumph, but with quiet relief. His wife slipped her hand into his and whispered, "You did it." His children beamed their fear, replaced with pride. For the first time since the storm, Marcus felt the air clear around him, as if a second hurricane had passed and left him standing once more. The next morning he stepped onto his porch and breathed deeply. Neighbors passed by, some offering hesitant nods, others avoiding his gaze, still caught between shame and gratitude. Yet the balance had shifted. The truth was no longer his burden alone. He looked at his home, the walls solid, the roof unbroken, and smiled faintly. The storm had tested his labor, but the fight afterward had tested his spirit. Both had held. He knew battles still lay ahead, but for now the ground felt steady beneath his feet. And as he turned back inside, he whispered to himself, "The storm was never the greatest danger. It was the people who thought they could own me, and they were wrong."